Let's get started with the third session, welcoming everybody back. And the first thing I wanted to do before launching into the slides I prepared for this session was to go over the shaping. I found those images that I had wanted to share yesterday. You guys probably remember I was like kind of stuck here and I wanted to show you some examples. Um, to kind of prove my point that the contour and to fill everything with green plants is what's important. You may not actually have these ratios of trees with those characteristics. So for example, this is a banana system in Martinique that was designed and implemented by Ernest. And then if you look here, there at the members that are making this up, you have emergent and high in the tree rows. And those are probably close to their appropriate ratio. And then the next member is low, it's cacao. And then below that, you have Mombasa, which is medium. So it's not the correct, in vertical um, orientation, it's not the correct ratio we talked about, but you can see it still works. It's creating kind of like this open space, right? Here's another example of a citrus system. I think this actually may be um, Fazenda Toca, the one that was covered in the Life in Syntropic documentary, movie, or video. So here you see eucalyptus is the emergent, and high is a banana. And then there's really not a low species. There's citrus and Mombasa, which are medium and medium. So you don't even have a low, but you still see the shape is what's maintained. So that's kind of where I came to the conclusion that it's okay to play with um, the different stratums as long as everything's green and the shape works. So I wanted to include a couple of those images. Yeah, I'm gonna um, back out of this now and we'll move on to today's presentation. Okay, here's an image from Haiti. This is a conference center that we hold trainings at. And this is most of our work now is practical and it's much more fun. Which is a good point to make. You can't learn this all just from online courses and watching videos. You need to get out there and plant. And I hope you guys have enough information if you haven't started that you're comfortable planting. And really, it's best to go and work with somebody who already has experience with doing the practical management to learn it. But I'm hoping that you get a foundation to understand what they're doing based on this lecture, as well as a foundation for design work. Here's the same disclaimer I gave yesterday. Um, so yesterday we were designing a syntropic system, mostly focusing on the placenta. If you guys remember, there were three parts. There was the tree line, the shoulder, and then the interrow. And when I look back, I think the main takeaway from that is to really go heavy on late placenta. The late placenta is like the bridge that gets you from the beginning and produces enough biomass to the forest stage, or as Ernest would call the secondary and climax stages. But today we want to also make sure when we're planting in the beginning that we have trees in the right position. So when they're fully mature, they're occupying the correct locations. And so normally I break it down into both, there's a biomass system and a production system like I've done here. The production system is normally a mixture of fruit and timber trees. And then we base the spacing depending on the canopy size. And I'll show you. I just do this literally with pencil and graph paper, and actually draw the canopy of the tree to scale, and then I kind of see how they all fit together. And we'll go through that as kind of a rough practice um, with some images. And I should go back and say that remember the concave shape I just talked about? We maintain that by having more of the shade-loving tree canopies covering the ground than the sun-loving ones. So when we design this, we'll be spacing apart these sun-loving trees, the high and emergent ones, further than you might normally do. But that is to allow these lower ones to grow. So, for example, in Haiti, um, this would be a common design that we do, but sometimes the row spacing will be different. So here, every small box is meant to represent 1 meter, and um, and so these are meant to represent tree lines where I have the pencil spaced every 3 meters. And I think top to bottom, there's about 24 meters in there. And you'll see that this allows you to design one unit that potentially could be repeated. So it gives you yeah, the smallest basic unit for a system is why I did it like this. And if we have time at the end of this lecture, I tacked on a similar activity for temperate climate because I saw yesterday there were like half of you guys or more were coming from the temperate. So if you guys want, I can go through the same in imperial measurements and temperate species. But right now we're doing metric system and um, tropic.
I have a question on the spacing.
Yes.
Is it a general rule that the further, the closer we are to the equatorial line, the less spacing we can plan for trees in general because of the light conditions, or
There, the rows I tend to space closer in the tropics than I do in the temperate climate, and that might be the reason. It's there's less sun up there in the temperate area, um, but no, I don't take that into account. I'm actually just basing it on the canopy sizes.
Mhm.
And what tends to happen in the temperate climate is the lower stratum trees and most of the species for the shade tolerant, not lower, but medium or low, they tend to need more sun than the ones in the tropics.
Mhm.
Unless you're planting currant and gooseberry, the other species that we might use in the kind of shade tolerant section need more sun. So then you end up spacing things a little bit further apart, both the rows and the trees to make space for them.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, I don't have like for the closer to the equator, I don't have an equation where I make the rows closer based on how close I am to the equator. It's based on the canopy size and what I know the trees need. Okay. So this is a common strategy that we use. This is by no way like the syntropic way to do it. It works in a lot of situations, but there are times where we throw this all out the window. And I have some designs later where you'll see we don't use this strategy. And so A1, um, okay, I don't need that's for people to review later, but A1 generally I do it a little different than I did in the guidebook. In the guidebook, I think I would say A1 was emergent and medium. So it's a tree that loves sun with a tree that tolerates shade. And then A2 was a different match. It would be high with low. So it would also be a tree that loves sun with a tree that tolerates shade. But I had these like yeah, I really wanted like all of those different levels manifested. But now I don't care so much if it's high or emergent. I would just be picking one, either high or emergent, and matching it with another medium or low. And potentially I could have a system where it's emergent and low only in A1 and A2. Um, and potentially it could be all the same trees, although I prefer diversity, and most of the time A1 would have one species and A2 would have a different pair of species. to try to bring in the diversity. And that diversity to me is more important than whether the tree is a high matched with a low versus in the end, what is more important than names or labels is knowing the characteristics of a tree. Because if your medium is citrus, as Marcus was saying yesterday, it needs more sun during flower induction. So you're going to match that with trees that either drop their leaves at that time, a deciduous tree like in Haiti, that would be cetarella or mahogany, or with a tree like coconut. Turns out those are all emergent, but if there was a tree that was high that had like a thin canopy that would be a good match with a citrus. So in the end, the more you know about the different species, the better matches you can create and not just base it on the labels, if that makes any sense. Okay, so this is basically, yeah, in the A rows would be long-term sun-loving production trees matched with a lower stratum. And in the C would primarily be a row that is focused on production of biomass with trees, but also could have a really shade-tolerating plant like coffee there as well. That would be the thought process behind this design. And then what I do is go online and I look up like commercial distance spacing for trees and what they typically manage the canopy size at. I go and try to find, for jackfruit, fruit, what do they manage their canopy or mango, these commercial growers. Normally the spacing we use is a little bit wider because we're associating it with some other trees. Um, and what just turns out to happen in a lot of these favorite fruit trees is they're all like 12-meter spacing. Um, it turns out to be a reasonable size. And then their heights, as you can see, are all similar too, where you could manage them. And then also the diameters are a little different. And I'm using those numbers to draw in the next slide. The diameter is like kind of the most important thing. Um, yeah, so in the next slide, for me, it helps to first place the sun-loving ones and make sure there's enough space. This is just my way of doing it. You might have a totally different way that's better for you. So you can see here, I chose mango or avocado. They actually have a similar crown and similar spacing, so you could substitute your species. And have drawn the trunk at 12 meters. Um, both in both directions. So you can see those are all 12 meters apart. And then um, in the A, I've placed another tree. In this case, it was coconut. So we have our high and our emergent, and then I put those on diagonal so they're not super close. And you can see it works. And I actually drew the coconut leaves to be more or less representing the size the canopy would be. So this is all to scale. And then the next thing I do is I come in and I say, okay, I need to fill all that low space. If you go back, you see I left a lot of low space here, at least as much canopy space for sun capture is available for the low as there is for the high and probably more. So now we got to fill that space. In Haiti, these would be common species of trees that we use. And again, I've gone online and looked up, what is common spacing. Coffee, I think now sometimes they even do 1 meter spacing. So, but so if you're doing a commercial large scale thing, you want to be hiring somebody to help you do the custom design. This is more for like, backyard garden. Um, and you might choose different numbers and depending on what your goals are and what you're doing. But you want to draw them to scale. So here is some of the um, this is some of the common spacing we do. And if you guys are using chat for some reason, I had the chat pulled up. Let me see if I can get it back up. Here we go. Does that show up in the what you guys are seeing, the chat? Is it blocking the screen or is it just blocking it for me? You can answer in the chat.
It's not blocking
Okay,
anything.
cool, cool. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna now we'll I can't keep the chat open and present. So you guys have to talk. I can't communicate with chat while I have a presentation up. Okay, so in this design, you see now I've added those lower levels. So in the A2 line, I match citrus with coconut because the coconut's less likely to shade too much. And then that's a little bit bigger canopy. That's I did on 4 meter size canopy versus the custard apple and the sour sop, which I have as like I think that's 3 meter size canopy. And then I place those in association with the in the A1 line with either mango or avocado. And if you have an excess of seedlings, you could even plant more than I have here. You could plant some that would be like under the canopy of the mango and the avocado. Like, I don't know if you guys see my cursor, but like here, you could plant another soursop, and that one just might not produce as much years later as these mature. Okay, now so what we have now is a most of the production in. I think in this case, I also end up using the C line for some production. Let's see what I did. So for the C line, you could add some more production in here, like things that really tolerate shade, like coffee, cacao, or pineapple. And then now we're also going to place the biomass trees, some long-term and short-term timber trees. So here are some timber trees that we use in Haiti. And these ones, I didn't put the canopy size because most of these will just direct up. We'll take all their lower lateral limbs and push them up. And and so they won't create as much shade. We'll keep the canopies really small. Here's some biomass trees that we often use in Haiti. And again, we cut these so aggressively, we prune these so aggressively, I did not put a canopy size on these. And the spacing, really the spacing is as much as you can plant. So for the biomass trees, we'll plant seeds, sticks, or seedlings literally every like 20 to 40 centimeters, and then we're gonna thin those later. Final spacing will usually be between 2 or 3 meters between the biomass tree. Typically we want one biomass tree for every production tree. The only exception would be maybe like a coffee system where that tree is so small you could potentially feed 2 or 3 coffees per biomass tree. So here, this is busy. I'm sorry, but you guys know Syntropic plantings are a bit complicated. So what I have here is this dark symbol is supposed to be a biomass tree. And so in my final spacing, I wanted to make sure I had one biomass tree per fruit tree. And I figured the ideal location would be kind of right in between the canopies. Then these diagonal would be timber trees. Now, I have them fairly closely planted because some of these would get harvested earlier and then some would be later. And so, you might actually need, if you're going to really take a mahogany to full maturity, you might need 18 meters or more between trees, but you can, in between that, plant some fast growing timber that you take out maybe at 10, 15 years, and then you have these other ones that you're harvesting later. Or sometimes you're just getting poles, but still it's might as well fill the space. So these um, box shaped trees are trying to represent timber. And then this smaller circle, this is either coffee. This is coffee in this case, but you could also do something bigger with cacao. So basically what I added is this line with the biomass timber and coffee, and then I added the biomass trees here. That's all that's here. And this is a complete design for the definitive spacing of the trees. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but this is something we would do for kind of like a kitchen garden. somebody has a small space, but they want a maximum amount of diversity in fruit, and you could even probably find others, acai and some other trees you could do in place of mango and avocado. So this offers like a lot of diversity.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm a bit confused on like the biomass trees in this drawing now, because you
Okay.
said also they can be planted 20 to 40 centimeters, which is very dense, right? And then you mentioned 3, 4 coffee trees per biomass tree. I don't know if I got you right there.
Yeah, for a more commercial coffee planting, I think I have a design I will be showing later, which I give all credits to Fernando and Johannes, who have an organization called Forest for Farming. I think if I'm saying that right, and they post on their website, which is literally forest, the number four, farming.com. They have designs that they have implemented. It's a nonprofit I think it's going to be the organization that does most education in the future and help to create woofing experiences and practical training. So I have a design that I made inspired by their work, and you'll see in that case the coffee are planted every meter, I believe. We'll look at that and see. And then in that case, there's I don't have biomass tree every meter. I have it every like two. I think I did every 2 meters, but he actually in his system did every three. Um, and so I hope that answered that. You kind of had two questions. There was that part, and then the other was maybe how does the 20 centimeter spacing how do you get from there to here? Was that another question?
Yeah, well, maybe you can answer which biomass trees you would plant for in 20 to 40 centimeters distance
Uh,
from each other.
any of the species I showed in this. So we're planting mostly by seed. I probably would not plant seedlings that close. That's just a huge expense. But we're planting
Mhm.
mostly by seed. We're trying to do as little with tree nurseries as we can in Haiti because most farmers can't afford that. So we're planting a seed mix. It would be all these different species I showed here. Well, maybe not all of them, but we get whatever we can. And we even collect stuff we
Yeah.
don't know and we mix it with some compost and we plant that like in those holes. And then we would
Would you
trade.
also plant cuttings or
Yeah.
grasses like vetiver that close?
Not in the tree line. We wouldn't plant any grass in the tree line. Um, we'd plant that in the shoulder or in the interrow. And we don't
Okay.
use
Why wouldn't you plant that in the same row? Because you shade it out.
Yeah, eventually it's going to die, and a lot of the grasses we don't use vetiver. That might do okay in a tree line because it grows kind of slow and it gets shaded quickly and dies after a few years. But Mombasa would you would be just killing it after a while because it would be otherwise it would kill your trees. It's too aggressive.
Hmm. Okay.
Usually we're weeding. We'll go through this a little later in the talk. We're removing any grasses that are within like 1 or 2 hand lengths from your tree because you don't want them to kill them and compete.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, maybe there are some people planting grass in their tree line, but that would be a lot of work. I'm just gonna say that I would rather plant annuals and then get into late placenta species like banana, cassava, or pigeon pea, which eventually will phase out completely, and then you'll cut them to make room for the maturing tree. Then I would grass. And then a lot of these seedlings we're planting for biomass trees, we're thinning those all out too. They're just to kind of create that pulse. And then the final spacing may not be exactly where I have them because if we have a really high performing tree in a meter different place, I'm going to choose, you know, where is my if it turns out the one I planted here does way better than that one, I'm going to choose that one. Okay. But I might focus my efforts in these spaces. We even plant our fruit trees by seed, and we just plant a plant a whole bunch of mango seeds right here. Okay. And then later we'll come back and top graft what species we want. So this is a very simple system. Okay, this is a different scale. Um, Wait, no, actually, this is the same scale. Yeah, this is. I don't know why I didn't draw the line for the trees. So this is a system we're doing in Haiti, which maybe it would not be considered fully syntropic, because this system, does it say annuals at the top? I can't see because of the um,
It does.
yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is a system. Actually, it'd almost be the same for charcoal or annuals. This is a system where we would be um, growing the trees, but planning to prune them heavily, and just to create a grow bed for commodity crops, like they grow corn, beans, cassava. So this would be, we would usually do this east-west orientation, and then the focus of production is short cycle plants here. So in this case, um, I've done it 3, 4, 4.5 meters. In this case, I just drew it to 3 meters. And then you can see all these biomass trees we've talked about earlier. And I threw in here jackfruit and mango, are excellent biomass trees, even though they're fruit trees. In this case, we wouldn't be going for fruit. We would be pruning these chest level. It's a very easy system to manage. And then using all that material to mulch and focusing our growth there. And then in between these lines, we'd even create, we'd even plant grass, which I showed this slide yesterday. So this would be kind of like a zoom in the intro, with the tree lines being on the right and the left. And I talked about yesterday, we plant like a little slower grass like brachiaria here and here. I wanted to show you where I got that inspiration. I should show you this picture first. This is from a large scale soy operation in Brazil. And the the grass in the lines here is brachiaria. This is a non-running, it is a clumping species. There are in brachiaria, there are both. So it's a brachiaria plus it's the clumping. It won't invade your soybean. And then they have a guy come by and trim it. In Haiti, we would just use a grass sickle or a machete. And and that what that creates is a weed-free planting bed where you grow whatever crops you want. It could be, in Zambia they wanted to grow chili, so that's why I had this design with chili, and then there's corn. You could try even fitting pigeon pea or some papaya in there. And different species. You could build little placenta consortiums and then come through and manage this to favor those sun-loving crops in the middle. So here's just another design. The way it's managed is similar to what you see in this image. So um, on the left, these are the trees are just starting to grow. These were all Inga species. I would use more variety personally. You can see after a few years, the Inga starts to mature and it starts to shade. So this is when you'd have to come through and then heavily manage it on the right, and then use the material for mulch. And what's cool, why this is not quite syntropic, what I'm showing you, this is a form of alley cropping from an organization called Inga Foundation, and they are pretty much limited to using Inga because it's the only tree in their area that produces large enough leaves that they can mulch the whole interrow. Most other trees, you might not have enough leaf material. But the only problem is if you're trying to grow some vegetables in these lines, that material can be kind of too coarse. And so the value of the grass is you get this great mulch material, which you can use for vegetables. And if your trees aren't producing enough leaf material, it's no big deal because you're producing the mulch you need for the vegetables right at the spot, and you're producing extra mulch from the trees. And then you're getting drought resistance, disease resistance, fertility, all the things that Syntropic offers, by having the tree lines there, even though you're giving up a little bit of crop. So this is another design. So the first one I showed you was more of a orchard, diverse orchard. This is more for growing annuals. This would be a possible way to design a silvopasture for grazing cow or goat. The biggest issue with these is you need to keep the animals from, you need to control their movements, especially when the trees are young. Um, in wealthier areas, people are using solar powered electric lines to just rope off the tree line, and then they can keep grazing their cow in the pasture area in the middle. Um, and then this design, we just tried to create some diversity. There's tons of diversity because for these trees that are just biomass, you can see you can choose from basically any of the options we showed you later. We thought it would be nice in the system. We could grow a couple of these elongated type trees for timber and not cast too much shade, so there's an added economic value. And then also choosing trees that are going to be able to feed the animals. So when you come and pruning them, you can put the leaf or fruits on the ground and feed the cows or goats. Anybody have any questions about how this, and then there would be, this is superimposed on the design we worked on yesterday, where you'd have these tree lines with all these placenta species. This is just the forest species, okay? Okay, I'm moving on to another design. This is one I just implemented in Zambia on a recent trip using the coffee designs that I learned from Forest for Farming or Forest for Farmers. I think it's Forest for Farming. Um, and what you see here is we're managing the coffee. Yeah, so here they're planting the coffee on really small dense planting. So you're literally planting one coffee per meter. And you can see this is to scale. So I have coffee basically everywhere in here. Those big black dots are my way of representing the biomass tree. In my case, I did them every 2 meters in the final spacing, but Fernando actually was doing it every three. Um, and then we're getting in some fruit trees because the coffee's like a little bit of shade. And here I chose we chose avocado because that's what the organization wanted to grow. And then the E stands for emergent, which in this case was a timber tree. And I find these easier to design where the focus crop is lower stratum because then you're already achieving that concave shape and you don't yeah it's just you don't need to figure out how you're going to get all the trees if you want sun-loving trees like high and emergent trees, then it's always tricky to create space and fill the lower area. But here, like the lower area is automatically filled, problem's kind of solved. And then here also there's some banana. We space them every 6 meters and skipped a line. This is to give kind of an early crop without creating too much shade for the coffee. Okay, I think this is all clear. If anybody has any questions on how I'm doing these designs to scale, let me know. And then you can see there's kind of a unit that gets repeated. I don't know if my cursor shows up, but you see like the four high and then the two emergent. And then that same, you can see part of that here, there would be, a repeating unit. So I always like to get one repeating unit so I can see the pattern and then I know what to do in the field. Okay. So that's it for the design activity. If unless at the end, if we want, we can also do the temperate climate. Now I'm going to shift a little bit into how we plant and manage the system, the practical part. This image is from Brazil. This is a family that's doing awesome work, and this is a coffee system. Okay, so in Haiti, when we do small plantings by hand, and this is a strategy we often use. So when we come into an area, we're looking for where we can gather organic material to start the planting. There's are occasions where we literally have almost nothing and we're just planting with bare soil, but that's kind of last resort. So usually we're trying to go in some local fields or find some trees where we can gather biomass. Then we're also looking to see what trees and seeds are available. We pay for seeds and have people collect them, but We're collecting seeds and cuttings. It's kind of gathering the planting material. And then we start by preparing the tree rows, and we'll go through this in the next few slides in more detail. We typically plant bananas or seedlings first because you have to dig the soil more and disturb things. And then once they're planted, we start to create those double mounds with the mulch material we have. And then we do the final planting in between those mounds. And then we finish the interrow or the B area. B area is old terminology I used, and I've been trying to change that on all my slides, but I can see it slipped through a couple places. Um, so basically, for seed collecting, we collect anything that's mature from a tree as long as it doesn't have thorns, and we'll throw it in the ground. Like anything will help create this consortium and then this burst of growth. And sometimes we're surprised that trees that we weren't focused on really perform well in a particular area, and we end up being a dominant member of the system. And if you're starting in the first few years, I really encourage you just to indiscriminately collect seeds that are ripe in your area and plant them there. You can always remove them if you decide it's too, like Lucena or Leucaena is one we don't plant a lot of because we know that one it seeds really quick and it can spread everywhere. Um, but we'll try pretty much everything. So we've then we talked about this already, determining row orientation, but then um, either with a compass or nowadays most cell phones have a compass app. We'll figure out north south and lay out those lines, and then we'll start preparing the tree lines by digging a trench. And the basic goal, most property we encounter has a compaction layer, which means previous agricultural activity has caused a compression of earth beneath the surface of the soil. The depth and thickness of that compression layer is going to be determined by the type of agricultural activity. If it's just people working with hose, then it's usually not much deeper than they're digging, and it's a thin layer. If they're using a cow with a plow, it's a little deeper and a little bit thicker. If they have tractors and bigger implements, then it's going deeper and the compaction layer is thicker. This first picture I showed here, when I visited their farm, they told me that had been a soy commercial farm before they did this coffee. And so they had a huge compaction layer. It was very deep, and they struggled to break through it. And they had to remove an entire tree line because all their trees' roots did a full 90 degrees and couldn't access the deeper soil, which means they're not resistant to drought, and they all started to lean and stuff. So there are situations where you really have to dig the trench. That being said, I know of some people who have property that has like almost no previous agricultural work, and they don't encounter any compaction layer. Usually you can find it if you go and shovel or pick your way down, you can find the layer where things start to pass more freely. Um, so it's possible you don't have to do this, but I have only encountered one situation in Florida where it was just all sand and we did not need to do this preparation. Normally we always do this, and the way we do it in Haiti, we call it the double dig. And the yeah, and to double dig, I think this image shows it best. Basically, we actually move we want to avoid mixing too much of the topsoil because the top layer is more fertile than the lower layer. So we're trying to break that compaction area and aerate, but not disturbing our fertility layer. So with a pick, which is what we have to use for that clay heavy soil in Haiti, we'll dig a trench and actually lift the soil up and out like you see on the left. And then at the bottom of that trench, we'll poke and lift the soil without necessarily mixing it. I don't know if that makes sense. That's the best way I can describe it. We do this second layer of digging. And in Michigan, where I'm at, I'll dig with like a shovel because the soil is easier to get through for one shovel length. And then below that, I'll decompact. Usually I use a 4-tine fork. It's like a really strong pitchfork-like tool. But you could also just stick the shovel and kind of pop the soil without mixing it. However, you can get through, and people have farm tractors and equipment. They can use um, a subsoiler to just do this easily. There's a lot of different ways to achieve it, but the principle is always the same. And did I skip something? The width of the trench kind of depends on the quality of the soil, but normally it's like maybe a hand width apart. It's the width of the one or two widths of the pick. Okay, and then we backfill it, the trench, and we can come back and test if we did a good job by using a machete. I'll come and push the machete through, and usually you can only get it a few 10, 15 centimeters before you do this work. And then if you did a good job, you can push it all the way through. And then you know, okay, the roots of those plants are gonna do really well. Okay. And the interrow preparation, um, generally we have a similar principle. Most of the time the soil is of good enough quality. We can plant something better than it's growing there. So we're usually planting Mombasa or sunflower, Mexican sunflower, or elephant grass, or they want to plant some corn and beans as well, the locals. So we're going through and we're trying to remove the existing plants with the least amount of disturbance. We normally do that with a hoe, and we're taking off, we call it shaving the grass. So we're taking off just the rhizome head, and leaving as much topsoil as possible. And sometimes we'll even shake the grass to leave the topsoil and then throw the grass like this guy has done behind him. We'll let that dry for a day or two, and once we're sure it's dead, then we'll use that as a mulch. Okay, so now, like as you can see here, they've trenched. We've shaved the inner row, and we're ready to start planting.
Roger, can I have a question?
Yes, Victor.
Um, have you got any? I don't know about the tropics, but I think some so-called invasive plants in the temperate zone, like Ailanthus altissima, uh, I think they can grow through these compaction layers. So don't you have some sort of trees that can break this up?
So I think what you're asking, Victor, is how about just plant trees that can make it through?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Well, don't aren't you also going to have some more other trees like fruit trees that you want that aren't going to break through?
Yeah, I'm asking if the guys that break through can help the other guys. I
If
haven't seen. I don't have a compaction layer. That's why I'm asking. I don't have
yeah,
experience in that.
uh, I'm not. I don't have experience with that, but what I'm imagining you're saying would require that you plant trees, grow them for a few in high density, grow them to break through, and then take those trees down a few years later, and then start your system. Is that what you're suggesting, or?
No, I thought that planting them at the same time. Maybe the guys that break through can help the fruit trees. I don't know. I'm just asking
Yeah, I don't
if
know
it's
either.
possible.
I think that they would have to be, if you have a real strong compaction layer, they would have to be planted like literally side by side, and the roots would have to pass through together. Um, but it's a good question, and I think that it would be cool for people to practice, because this requires a lot of work to do the trenching, and when you find situations where you don't have to, it's great. Um, but I know of enough stories where people didn't do it and had to redo their work that generally we do the trenching. But yeah, that's interesting. And I know, yeah, there are certain trees that don't need to do that, and we're often choosing those trees to help. Okay. Okay, so now once we've prepared the tree line trench and we shaved the inter area, before we bring the mulch in, we normally will plant bigger plants in the tree line. Um, because it gets hard to do that if you mulch first, then you're going back and pulling it back to dig a hole for a banana or dig a hole for a big seedling. So you want to plant the big ones and the sticks, branch cuttings. It's easier to put those sometimes in first. So we're doing that. Behind this guy, you see there is this guy who's using the hoe. I don't know if you can see my cursor. There's a stake there. What that tells me is we planted a banana, and there's also one here. And then we put that stake there to let us know there's a banana there. So, okay, how do we plant bananas? For those who are in the tropics, there is a unique way in Syntropic. Um, and we normally take a large corm or potato. I don't know what term you're familiar of using, but like we would take a daughter from an existing clump, and then we would cut this is actually the daughter, and if you maybe can appreciate the pseudostem would be coming horizontally, and it's cut on an angle and planted either like this, or sometimes we'll plant it even more on its head a little bit. And the reason we do that is because then the new growth forms like a hook, as you can see in this design. And it's the same way that the banana would grow off of the main clump. It grows strong with a hook. It takes maybe a week or two longer than if you plant them straight up, but you get a much stronger banana in the end. This is something that's much easier to show in person. We clean it up a little bit, look for disease and bugs and remove them, and then plant them like that. Here's an example of them planting. The deeper and the more organic matter you can plant, the better. The bigger the corm, the better. In this case, we planted the bananas probably every 3 or 4 meters. We planted seedlings, and then we took all of that organic material that we've been collecting. In this case, we got most of the material from a large mango tree. I took off the top, and then with machetes, we broke it into small pieces, organized the wood on the ground, and then the leaves on top. And then we also went through in the field there and gathered some of the herbs and grass and put them on top as well. That's kind of the last image. Here's an example. I tried to show before and after. This is a mango tree on the left before pruning, and then after you can see the top is removed. That would be one. We took like the top third of that tree. That'd be one way we get organic material. In Haiti, they also have this tree on the left is called chêne or a tropical oak, and they come and just prune it super heavy because it bounces back. Eucalyptus does as well. And so trees that we know will mature trees in the area that will tolerate a heavy pruning will come through harvest material for them. Or we'll take a grass sickle and cut grass. So we'll literally go by hand and just gather all this stuff. Most people in developed countries, you can just buy a whole bunch of hay or wood chips or something like that. If you're doing a small project, it may make sense to pay for some inputs. You have to determine based on what your resources are. Here's a picture of us making the seed mix where we take seeds. We usually have a seed mix for large seeds and one for small seeds. It's easier to organize them that way. And then we thin them out with some soil or compost and then plant that in the tree line. And then normally everywhere or every meter we'll make a little we'll plant cassava or manioc, and this is producing like a little nursery for that seed mix. And as you can see here, the stick is planted on a diagonal, and that way if there are large roots growing you may want to try to harvest, that they're more likely to grow in the interrow instead of into the tree line. But most of the time we don't even try to harvest this manioc. It's just there to produce a little nursery like you can see in this drawing. And you can use it. We don't always use manioc. You can use any fast-growing placenta species. Usually it's late placenta because it needs more than one grow season. Actually, we're planting everything in there. We're planting early placenta like corn and bean or jack bean right in the tree line to get the growth pulse and then removing it. and we're also planting later placenta species. Pigeon pea is one of our favorite, chaya, cassava, things like that. And then we're literally growing those. And I say we grow like a little grotto. So as the trees come up, we carve out a little home for them. And then as they get taller, we keep pruning these biomass placenta species to allow the tree to come up through it and get the sunlight it needs. Here's an example of where we planted those cassava on angle. And then for sure, right in between there, there's going to be some tree seeds placed. This is just a picture to kind of show you in stages how we did it. Here you see the wood is laid down. The bananas have been planted. We've put the stick cuttings in there that will grow. And then we came through and mulched it. Everybody getting the and then after we mulch, we plant the seeds. I don't know if everybody's getting the sequence and how we're doing this. This is just a graphic to go back to kind of get an idea of exact spacing that we use. Won't go through all of this right now. This is one potential way. And then if you follow me to this point, we've finished planting the tree line. So then we're focusing on the, interrow. And in this case, we probably did what we often do. We dug little trenches to plant the grass seed, which was Mombasa. And then we also planted some corn and beans in between the lines of Mombasa for an early harvest. And this is more or less the pattern we would have used in that last image. And so this is this is the typical sequence of work that we would do in a planting. And then it might be, of course, different depending on the design, but I think a lot of the characteristics would be the same. Does anybody have any questions about this before I go on to some basic management strategies? Okay. So over the next year, we're going to manage. This is an image taken, I believe, year 1 or 2 after planting. So you can see we had success with a lot of um, late placenta species are growing and some trees are even growing. But if we don't do anything, it's going to get all shaded. The trees could potentially die and you lose the momentum. So this is a way I've mentally organized it. I just made this up. It's by no way like the Syntropic way. Um, but I've noticed that the management is a little bit different depending on the maturity of the system. So I've broken them into different phases of growth of the age of the system. And then I've tried to outline in the next few slides how the management is unique at that phase. So during the placenta, which is maybe the first 3 or 4 years, maybe longer in temperate climate. This is where um, you have your short-lived non-tree species are dominating. And then the second phase would be the young, I call it young trees or young forests. So this would be the point where the trees you planted start to dominate, but they're still adolescent. And then mature trees would represent when you're really getting to fruit production and the trees are mature. And so the overall function often in a placenta stage is that your system is acting as a nursery. It's the feeding the baby trees, right? And it's a biomass factory. During this phase, we're not as worried about that shaping the concave 20, 40, 60, 80 ratio. That's something we're more focused on later. At this point, we want just maximum biomass production and things that will grow and are adapted to the current soil. During the young tree phase, it's a transition phase where we're starting to get some biomass from the trees. And then in the mature phase, we're really getting almost all of our biomass from the trees at that point. So the management is going to be tree pruning. And then, of course, we'll be managing the production trees and pruning them by standard methods. So let's go into a little bit more detail. If you have just planted a system, you have a placenta phase and you need to manage it. So we're going to do things like selective weeding the tree lines. The trees are very small at this point. They can't tolerate competition. Um, we're going to be pruning the biomass that we've grown to create a growth pulse. We're going to be checking occasionally on the seedlings and other high value plants and making sure they have enough sun and space for them. This is often very quick work, but really important to do. And then we're also, if we planted excess number of baby trees, there's a point where they're going to start conflicting and it helps to thin those. So these would be some different tasks we would do. And I'm going to go into the details of each of those a little bit now. So if this is our tree line, I would come back and one of the first things I always do would get on my hands and knees and weed. It's a little bit less important for these trees because they're more mature. Um, but I chose this image so you can better see the tree line. And normally I would say 20 or 30 centimeters of space is important to have around these trees so they're not at risk. And then how you treat the weed that's growing depends on what it is. Um, if you're not sure, it's best just to pull it. But in general, most herbs and flowers are not going to grow back, and you can literally just take your pruning shears and cut them and use the material as mulch. I call them cut and keep. You're not disturbing the soil that way. You're leaving the roots in. They're not going to cause a problem. There's a second category of plants, which is often vines and grasses that if you were to just cut them, they will grow right back. So you'll always be fighting with them. So in that case, I'm usually trying to pull them by the roots. Um, but most of those plants, if you put them on top of your mound of mulch, it will dry and won't grow there. So you can pull and keep those plants. And then there's a last group of plants. There's not too many species like this, but there is a group of plants that is very aggressive. And anytime you pull or break a piece, it will grow back really aggressively and just choke everything out. These ones you really need to pull and remove from the system. So here are some examples of the plants that we would just cut and keep in Haiti. They're little flowering herb-like guys. That one on the left is legumitous. Um, Here's a vine. You guys all know what grass looks like. These I would pull and keep the material. This tree is, or I'm sorry, this weed, it will grow back in Haiti and most tropical areas very strongly. Every little piece you break will grow a root. And so this one we usually pull and put in a bag and remove from the system. Or we'll create a big ball of it. So if it grows back, it's in its own little ball, kind of contained, and we'll flip that ball occasionally so that it struggles. And so yeah, here's an image of us. The far left and the far left row has been of that left picture has been unpruned, and then on the right you can see here we've come through and we pruned. In this case, I think it was chaya and cassava that we're pruning and we're using that material. And as we're doing that, we want to look closely. Here you see this is like a seed mix area. I have like on the left, I believe these are mango. And on the right, I don't know if that's tamarind or another tree. And so we're creating a little space. We're taking extra care for our baby trees. Okay, so that would be that's the best way I can describe on an online program what we do for this early placenta phase. So the next mid phase of management would be when the trees are young trees. So when this is will depend on your climate and other factors. But typically when the trees are getting 2 to 3 meters tall, we can start really with apical pruning. We're also removing some of the lateral branches on these trees. We've actually been doing that all along. And so this phase is when we're starting to get some of our organic material, mulch material from the trees. And I mean, this is the same sort of pruning you would do in conventional orchard, you're looking for dead or diseased limbs, removing those first. We're creating the shape that's needed for whatever fruit tree you have. That's going to vary depending on the species. Um, and I'm not going to go into conventional fruit tree pruning. There's lots of good resources for that. That information is already out there. But later we'll go through the specifics for syntropic, like the biomass tree pruning. Um, but as a general rule, it's always better to start with the easy stuff. Okay, I'll remove the dead and the disease, and then step back and look again. And yeah, prune only when you're sure, and do it in little steps. And the tree will change as you do that, and you'll see a different path than you might have in the beginning. So it's always good to pause, take a step back, look again, come back later if you're not sure. During this period of time, it's kind of a transition time. So we also still need to be doing a lot of cutting of our grasses, our Mexican sunflower, our placenta plants. But they're starting to slow down a little bit typically when the trees get to this stage. And we're going to start, yeah, shaping our not only our biomass trees, but our production trees. Okay. And then as the system even gets more mature, when we're starting to get fruits, our biomass trees are going to be more established. We're going to really be getting a lot of material from them. And this is where you're going to get better at your true tree pruning skills and need to learn methods for pruning up at heights, need to, which is going to vary depending on what resources you have. Ernest likes to use a hand homemade ladder that he makes out of jackfruit wood, which is super light and strong. And he goes up his ladder with a collapsible pruning saw and does most of his pruning with that. He also has, I've seen a lot of guys using these small electric chainsaws. Um, but it's important to get training specifically for safety and using the correct safety um, um, clothing and wear. As a general rule, this might vary depending on species, but what I see them often do is maintaining, they don't like to let the canopies of two trees conflict. So if you have a lower stratum I had the soursop or citrus, and you have like a mango here, you would keep like a meter or 3 feet of space between those two trees as they're starting to grow. Um, so that is achieved usually by removing the lateral branches on the taller tree, the one that likes more sun, and then keeping the shade tolerant one shorter. And you're pruning at a young age the top so that you're training the tree to be short. Um, and it's difficult to give an exact height. Everything's going to depend on the tree that's next to the tree that you're pruning. So you want if your biomass tree can tolerate shade, you can prune it at a lower height. If it needs sun, then you're going to prune it at a higher height, depending on what's right next to it. And you can change the height you prune. I used to think like wherever you prune the first time, that's the height that your tree will always have to be. But you can change. You can actually start lower and then prune higher on the regrowth. And then here's where we're thinking of that concave shape, where we want to make sure we're not letting the sun-loving trees totally shade out the bottom. And occasionally might involve thinning trees if we've planted really densely like we want to. So that is the best way I can break down management. Anybody have any questions about these three phases? Yeah, the placenta, I'm calling it young tree and mature tree uh, phases of maturity and how the management is a little different. Okay, if not, then actually I'm going fast enough. I think, and if everybody agrees, I can just do a little bit about temperate design. Ooh, actually, I moved. Actually, before I go into temperate design, I had these graphics that help to show how we manage biomass trees. And maybe some of you have seen it before. This is from my old guidebook. There may be some slight adaptation here, um, but um, as you can see, when the tree is as young as just a meter tall, you're already going to start removing the lateral branches and kind of encouraging this biomass tree to go up and not conflict with the things next to it. It's going to be different than in this picture. You're going to have a dense row, so you're creating space. And then as that tree reaches 1.5, 2 meters, you can start to prune the top. And exactly at which level, like I said, is going to depend on what you have next to it. But usually when it's 2 or 3 meters, it's high enough to get the sun it needs. And we're pruning the top, but leaving a little crown. Do you guys see how there's like I tried in each cardinal direction, like north, south, east, west, you would leave some lateral branches and then you'd cut those short. And what that does is it encourages the regrowth to occur at the top of that tree as opposed to getting suckers and things from growing off the main trunk. You still will get some, but not as much. And then you get that regrowth, and then every year you're coming back and pruning again like that. Um, this is the only thing different. This I show like a higher pruning level because this would be assuming you have fruit trees growing under it. So this would be the level that I would do in that annual system I talked about where you're growing sun-loving crops in the interrow. Here you're keeping the trees like where you can just easily manage them on foot. This would maybe be an example of how tall these biomass trees would be in an orchard system. Okay. And then now I'm going to move to the temperate climate. So we'll do the temperate climate again. We're focusing today primarily on um, the fruit tree design. But I use a similar, you guys will recognize this similar pattern. We have a tree line, we have a shoulder, and then we have an interrow. In a system I planted here in Michigan, I used from green cover crop, I got a perennial pasture mix. And then I even have like a little mini sea line here where I plant some biomass plants that grow tall and produce a lot of biomass. In this case, it was sunchoke, giant miscanthus. I'm trialing now also like milkweed and some other plants that grow and mullein and things that grow just easily around here. And I would say one of the things I've learned is the perennial pasture mix I used um, turned out it was not a good performer because the soil is so poor. And I kind of wish I would have used switchgrass or orchard grass as my main interrow grass because I'm seeing that's growing much better. And I might even be taking out the and planting some more of that. So, okay, this is a focus on the tree line. You guys will have access to this PDF once we're done. You can see again, I do like a shoulder. In the shoulder, I often plant comfrey, and then just outside of that, I'm planting orchard grass, and then I'm coming through and cutting and mulching with those. And then in the tree line, I'm planting things like sunflower, millet, corn. It's like super easy and cheap to get that, along with um, perennials and tree seeds in trees. This is a system here in Michigan that we planted. There's wood chips, and then this is hay on top. And then you can see the tree line outside of these double mulch is where we're planting the shoulder. And then the interrow has its own recipe. So, okay, now this is going to catch us up to, you guys recognize this. So in this case, I didn't draw so in this case, I'm using imperial, and I think in later images I have the scale. I have forgotten now because it's been a while since I've done temperate, exactly what I have here. These might be 15 feet apart. Let's see, how many boxes do I have? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My guess is each box is representing 2 feet, and then these are 16 feet apart. That's how I did the design. And so there technically is a C line here, but it doesn't have trees. I put the sunchoke and these late placenta plants here. So in some ways, it's actually very similar. This would be almost like 3 meters, especially if I did 20 feet. They're a little closer. Okay, so yeah, that's 16 feet. And here again, I use the same strategy where I have sun-loving tree, the emergent or high, paired with a shade tree, medium or low. And in this case, I did fruit in one line and timber in another. And the reason was that allows the timber can be managed is with a very small crown. And then so fruit trees are actually going to be every 32 feet apart in this design, the big fruit trees. So you guys are probably recognizing this strategy now. It's the same. I went and figured out what are the average diameter people are managing these different fruit trees at. Of course, this varies a lot. For example, with depending on whether you're using a dwarf or standard size. Generally, I'm using standard size because I want the drought resistance associated with the deeper roots. But you would do totally different if you're using dwarf apple or semi-dwarf. You would have a different diameter. You'd have a different height. You have to figure those numbers out yourself. But I came up with this graph, and as you can see, um, a lot of the fruit trees are between 20 to 35 feet wide. So, and then I have the shade-loving plants I came up with, which there's a lot of options. Did the same thing. I came up with their diameter and their height, and then I start drawing. And here, I think what I have here is like apple and one of these shade-loving plants, like serviceberry or something small, aronia, and I drew them to scale so that I can kind of see how it's working, okay? And then for the A2 line, I'm picking a timber tree. Here's a bunch. And now I'm putting the timber tree in. They're represented as I did before with this um, square or diagonal shaped square. I'll be managing those the same way I do in the tropics. I'll be taking their lateral branches, pushing them up. And in this case, I think I chose peach um, as the plant to associate with the timber tree. So you see here this would be the sun-loving trees, the apple and the timber tree, and then these would be the shade-loving ones, the shade-tolerant ones. And as you can see, they're pretty. I did a pretty good job of. I maybe could have made this even more open so that the shade takes up more space. And in this last image, I come in and you guys recognize my strategy now. These are where I imagine I could have definitive biomass trees or mother trees. And I'm making sure I have at least one for every tree. And then, yeah, I draw here, I give you some of the species that I could have placed in there and their spacing. And again, this is all superimposed upon that placenta system. This is the forest stage. And I also had the separate design for the placenta. That's how I kind of get it all together. And then these plants I put in their own category because they're so tolerant of shade. You can almost add them in below everything else that I showed. Okay, and this is to kind of reinforce that superimposed on this forest stage. There's all that placenta stage, and it matches up like that. At the end of this PDF, you'll get a list of some of the favorite trees I use and in their which locations. Any questions so far? So this is it. Actually, we're coming in a little bit under an hour and a half. So I did really um, uh, did a good job maintaining the time. Thank you guys for joining. I would encourage you guys, if you're going to design something, to get the help of somebody who has experience doing this. But I would hope that, unless you just really don't have anything to lose and you want to just practice and practice, but if you hire somebody to do a custom design, I would encourage you to try to do your own design first, and then you can use that as an opportunity to learn. You can come up with what are the production trees you want to grow, get some graph paper, start drawing it out. How are you going to do it? What species are you going to include? And then either hire somebody, or if you can find people to give you feedback, maybe, and then learn from the process of doing it. That's what I was hopeful, that with the tools I gave you today, you could start practicing design and get your hands dirty, figuratively.
I have a question on the guide you are still developing. I don't know how far it got. Um, will it be published anytime soon? Would it be free accessible, or what are your plans?
So I don't know when it's going to be ready. I wish it was ready a long time ago. And I have a folder. I was looking in my computer dating back to 2023 where I was working on that. And to be honest, this teaching is helping me to create the book. I find that the best flow of the book is always the same flow that I do in training. And so, yeah, I wouldn't wait for it. I what I can tell you is the book would basically have all this content I have right now. I haven't left anything out so far. The only thing that's really missing is what you would learn in real life, in practice. And I will
Mm,
share after this, once I have time to edit and upload these videos, I will also upload a PDF to my website of these presentations. So you can review the video and review the PDF and see all these images and stuff like that. And I think that's going to have to be your guidebook for now. I don't know when. I'm not going to make any promises, because I've learned I don't have. It comes in creative bursts, and I know when it's ready, and I don't know when it's ready right now.
yeah. All right.
And I don't know if I doubt I would ever charge something for it, other than like I'm doing with this, like honest donation or payment by the heart. If there's a physical copy, then of course there will be a charge to cover the printing, and any profit would go to the nonprofit I have anyway.
Mm. And then maybe one last question, because you said the sun, or um, how much sun trees want is usually not so easy to find, right? Like if they are shade
Uh,
tolerant
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
rather
yeah.
struggling and so on. So if you could have some sources for that. I also have some books for South American trees, for example, because that's what mostly interests me. For Africa, I really don't know, actually. It's a bit difficult to find all the information. But yeah,
So
if you have some, then
okay, so
yeah.
where I would guide you is, in the beginning, I used to use primarily Namaste's book. It's like Agroforestry from Machete to Tractor, I think it's called in translation. And there are, if you go to the Facebook page, Syntropic Agriculture Community, and go to the file section, you can find a copy of his PDF, and translated to English. And in the back, there is a section where it has different trees. There's also a Excel file from New Zealand and Australia that has both tropical and temperate climate trees, that has a lot of good information. And I believe it's posted in the file section. There are a bunch of resources in the file section, both for the Syntropic agricultural community, and if you go to the temperate one that I moderate. There are files there also with, there's one from Europe with tons of species in there. And there's different tabs, one for trees, one for the placenta species. So use what's out there already. You'll see, though, there's some conflicting advice. Like I've seen mulberry listed as emergent or high or different layers. So you have to use your, in the end, you have to kind of make a judgment call. But let's say you just cannot find what you have on that list. There's kind of two strategies. One is to go out and observe. So a lot of times in parks, in your region, you can find mature trees and you look for species that they'll often plant them close together. And if you find a tree that is growing really well below another tree, then you'll know it does well in the shade. And that's usually that's the trick is finding the shade tolerant ones. So you look in the forest and nature, you look in the jungle, you look in the parks, and just observe how things are growing on the edge of forests and see which ones are tolerating some shade. And then the only other thing I could say is you just go and you do an online internet search with the tree species you want and keywords like characteristics and then look and I would say like I'd say if you can find any source that says it tolerates mixed shade or shade, then that's the right one. That's the right one. The one's brave enough to say that. And then if you often you'll find trees like that. It'll one source will say that and the other one says full sun. And I will usually if I
Mm.
find something that says shade, I will give it a shot
Mhm.
in the lower levels. Yeah. Yeah, and
Okay,
just
thank you so much.
and post in these groups, post in the Facebook groups. And if you're a temperate climate one, we have the WhatsApp group. You can post in there and ask people and get see if people have pull from other people's observations. People may have witnessed things that you don't have directly available to that'll help you. It's a really good question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have a book like the book that I mentioned. It says helio, what helio? I forgot the word, but like sun loving, the
Uh-huh.
Latin name,
Yeah, yeah.
or like semi or shade
Helio
tolerant. It does say
heliotropic.
it. But not for every species. Yes, only for some.
Yeah, it's information that's hard to come by and often incorrect. It's something that needs developing within the community. We need to start practicing and see how different species behave. I have a friend who doesn't know anything about syntropics. He actually created a great experiment, which I have posted in, I think, both the WhatsApp group and the Facebook group, where he had to clear out a bunch of forest, really mature, like hardwoods in Michigan around his home because he was trying to get satellite internet which in the end didn't function, it didn't work. And then he grew up on a cherry farm. So his first thought he had was to plant cherry trees in this open space. It wasn't that big. It's like 50 feet, what's that, 20 meters or something, circle. And in there he planted like cherry, pear, apple, peach. And the one that ended up performing the best was the cherry. He get fruit every year from that. And the one that did the worst was the apple. And most people consider cherry an emergent, but I mean, he was literally growing it right next to 30-foot tall trees and getting fruits from it for a bunch of years. Now, those trees, like 10 years into it, they're starting to close their canopy. He would have to manage them, but I'm still impressed. Like, basically, all of the trees except for the apple produced fruit. So, what that tells me is that most temperate fruit trees tolerate at least a little bit of shade and experiments
Mm,
like this are like really valuable, yeah.
definitely, yeah.
So just if you know of examples, share them so other people can benefit and keep your eyes open every time you're out and about in nature. There's potentially you could witness something to help you with your efforts on the farm.
Mm.
Okay, any other questions? This is all the material I have today. This last slide is just like my information. So when I post it as a PDF, people know the source.
Just a short remark. Um, you didn't really talk about the growth pulse, which is quite an amazing thing that I had experienced with the Syntropic, and I think there's some. I don't know if because most Syntropic happens in the tropics, in the tropical zone, and I tried winter pruning in the temperate zone, and I never experienced the growth pulse.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I this thing. I've been experimenting with this, and I only experienced the growth pulse during summer pruning. And I think maybe you could talk about the growth pulse just for 1 or 2 minutes, if you have anything to add on that in your systems, what you
Y-
have seen.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think what you're asking is for temperate climate, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good experience with that for two reasons. One is my most mature garden, which I planted in 19, and it has beautiful willows, which I have successfully pruned in the summer. They have had no problem accepting summer prune. The problem is that garden I accidentally poisoned, and this is maybe a lesson for everyone else. I poisoned it by using my friend's horse manure, and he did not realize that the hay he was feeding them had an herbicide called Grazon, and it basically has wiped out my ability to grow almost any production. The only things I can grow there is like comfrey and orchard grass, and I'm multiplying these plants. So that system where I would expect to see the growth pulse, I can't. And then I have a system that's now just 2 years old. This would be the start of the 3 years. And that one I guess I would hope to see, but the trees aren't old enough to prune. And I've discovered the soil quality is so poor there. I'm actually like almost resetting the entire system with lower fertility biomass plants because the original ones I planted are growing, but like in suspended animation. So that's a long answer to say that basically with temperate climate, I haven't gotten to witness the growth pulse, but I know of people reporting it. Um, the woman in France who's written a book about it uses annuals for her growth pulse and like plants tons of sunflowers and other things. And she's just amazed by how her plants perform. So that might be one way to get the growth pulse. I think the question Victor was getting at is there is more um, confusion, I should say, about when to prune your biomass trees in the temperate climate, or there's differing opinions, anywhere from winter to early spring to mid or early summer. I think Ernest actually recommend what would turn out to be like a July pruning. I think he says 6 weeks before the hottest time of the year, something like that. And but then he says there has to be rain at that time. So for us, that's not a problem. We usually have some rain, but for Europe in the last few years, you guys have had like really dry seasons. So I know that most people are not pruning then. And so, yeah, I think the question you're getting at, Victor, is when's the right time to prune and in a temperate climate? And I don't have an answer. I think it's going to vary a lot from person to person. And my feeling is like spring is a growth pulse, you know, and if you if you pruned in the winter, then you're seeing the growth pulse in the spring. But it's, yeah, I suppose it's hard to tell that apart from a typical growth pulse. For tropic climate, I think what I taught in the first session about growth pulse which is you typically do it at the start of your agricultural season if you're focused on your interrow. So that's the rainy season in Haiti, or you're doing it at fruit induction if you have mature fruit trees. That's about all there is to teach, really, from the tropical standpoint. So that's why I didn't go into it a whole lot more during this session, and and it becomes very customized, the pruning. Um, Depending on what you've how you're designed your system. So it's a little bit hard to say to give like a basic rule. Um, is there any other open questions on that, Victor? Is there anything else?
No, no, no. I'm still trying to work this out, and I've been experimenting with this for a few years, and I still
Okay.
haven't made up my mind yet.
Okay. I think to the best of my ability, I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh, Roger, I'm a little curious what that book is called, the book by the French woman that you're talking about, where she kind of goes into the growth pulse.
I'll I'll find it and send it to you. It's mentioned somewhere in the yeah, you can't look back in that WhatsApp group you're in. Um
Yeah,
yeah, I don't remember the name, but I have it and I can send you a link to that.
great. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
No problem. That is, of course, in French. Any any other questions before we call it a day? And if you guys think of if you guys can give me feedback, I would really appreciate it. If you think of anything, or especially after you get the PDFs and the material, if you th can see ways to make it better, things that I omitted, something you see as an error, I would really would like that feedback and welcome that, and without criticism at all. So.
Just a short question also on these 20, 40, 60, and 80%. I am not sure if I really got it right, because I also didn't see it in the former guidebook that you had. Um, any other source where I can find it with an explanation?
Um, does
In
anybody?
your video, but when you upload it, probably.
No, I mean that's like Ernest's classic teaching. So it's usually you find that in a lot of places. Um, so what the percentage refers to is the amount of sun that stratum is capturing. So if you take all your emergent trees and you were looking from a satellite view down, and you looked at the average canopy size of the emergent trees, you would want that to cover 20% of your land. So I don't know anybody who measures these and does it. That's why I don't really like using those ratios. Okay, and then for your high stratum, whatever those trees would be and plants, again, you would add up the canopy size. That should be 40% coverage, and those might overlap a little bit. Some of these, it won't add up to 100 because you have some trees under other trees' canopies, right? Your medium and low will be under the high and emergent. So that's why the
Mhm.
20, 40, 60, 80 adds up more to 100 because you're overlapping. And then yeah, for the lowest, those would you would add up the how much canopy or yeah of the trees and plants is covering the ground, and you want that to cover 80% on average during your prune cycle. But I don't know anybody who measures or even does all of that. And I figured out what they're actually doing is they're just making sure they have this open forest. I think those pictures I showed you where a forest is too narrowly managed and then one that's too wide. I think that's the you want somewhere in between, you know. You want a forest where your trees have open space between them like a glade. Like they have on
Okay.
ski runs, you know, in ski runs where they have the trees kind of far apart, people can ski in them. That's a rough way to do it, you know. And then that 20, 40, 60 represents more of the shaping of these mature trees that allows those lower levels to get the sun they need.
Hmm.
And
Like
that
in an
sh
ideal case, right?
in the ideal case, exactly.
Mm. Okay.
I think if you stick to if you looked at the species I gave you and how I spaced them and stick to that sort of spacing in the graph paper I did there, you will achieve that as long as you're pruning your biomass trees. And
Okay.
I got one very high level practitioner to say that basically all he does is he just wants more from the shade tolerant level than he does from the sun loving level, or the upper canopy and the understory, whatever you want to call those. So you want the canopies of those shade tolerant ones to consist of more than half of the canopy space compared to the ones that are up above.
Hmm.
So it's as easy as that.
Yeah,
But
makes sense to capture more sunlight, right?
at that lower
Going
levels.
down.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's the concept. I yeah, I don't know of it's hard to get a graphic of that. That's why I had those pictures with the systems where you can see the different steps and levels, and you just want the sun to be able to get down to those lower levels, whether it's like the tin roof arrangement or the dimples where sun's getting down in these different pockets. The concept is still the same. It's hard to visualize and hard to describe. I get it. Um, is
No,
that
yeah, but I
better
have a
though?
better idea now. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any last questions before we call it a day? I'm gonna go ahead and kind of pop out of screen sharing. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining. You have my contact and know how to get a hold of me if you have questions in the future. Look forward to seeing what you guys do, and look forward to sharing this information with other people too.